Okay, and I will let Anusha begin the presentation.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. Thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. I'm pleased to be here with Dr. Priolo, who is a recent graduate from our lab, and the information that she's going to share today is very fresh as it stems from her doctoral dissertation she defended a couple months ago. But before we begin, I just want a second to acknowledge that Elisa and I are joining you from the unceded territory of the people of Treaty 7 in Southern Alberta, and that the city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. One of the reasons that we acknowledge the territory in this way is that so we can work in good ways together this evening. And also, I think it's important to note that the Western colonial systems that govern our society are often difficult for newcomers to navigate as they come from different spaces and different cultures. So the title of our talk today is Helping Newcomer Youth Navigate the Process of School Integration. I'm curious to read in the chat kind of where you situate yourself so that we can speak to the work and the position that you might be coming from. But before we do that, I just want to spend a little bit of time telling you a little bit about ourselves, just to help situate the context of our work and the research that we engage in. For me, as you can see in the pictures on the screen, this work is near and dear to my heart because I'm a second-generation newcomer to Canada, and I've dedicated my program of study to community-based research with racialized, marginalized, and minoritized folks, including newcomer communities. And for me, it's a way of honoring the sacrifices that our family members and to give back to different communities. And, you know, those are just some of the identities that I hold. You can probably guess from the pictures up there that there are multiple others that I bring to the table. But obviously, when doing this work around newcomer integration, that part of myself is very central. As we engage in today's presentation, I invite you to think deeply about your own background, your own positionality, and consider how your own attitudes, beliefs, and maybe even biases impact your views of immigration, your views of newcomer communities, and the interactions that you might have with folks.
So myself, I am a third-generation Canadian. My grandparents were all immigrants from Italy. My parents were both born and raised in Calgary, Alberta. However, my wife's father was also a newcomer to Canada and came at the very young age before he started school. So again, I grew up hearing stories of being a newcomer, the challenges of entering school without knowing English, and really being marginalized and discriminated against for not being a Canadian citizen or a Canadian. I also identify with the LGBTQ community. As you can see, I have a picture of my son and my wife. As I did this work, I initially felt like an outsider working with newcomers. However, as I engaged in the work, I did find myself aligning more with newcomer participants and newcomer teachers and their experience of being marginalized within the school system. So that's a little bit of my background, and it really does inform my social justice lens and the social justice lens that we used as I engaged in this research. We're briefly gonna talk about the framework of school integration, how we engaged in it, how we understand it, but the whole meat of the presentation is really gonna be talking about the experiences of newcomer youth, teachers, and service providers. When I say service providers, I mean school counselors, settlement workers, at-risk youth workers, and administrative staff, and how they all, within one single designated high school, talk to us about the experiences of newcomer youth and what's really occurring in our schools in Calgary. So within that, I'm going to talk about the stress of cultural transitioning, language acquisition, making connections, navigating academics, personal life, and then we're going to spend some time talking about mental health concerns. Then Anusha will come back and she'll talk about implications, and we'll open up some questions for discussion. Now, when I talk about school integration, I'm talking about the factors inside and outside of school that impacts youth's experiences as they integrate into the educational system. So factors inside of school, things such as orientation that they may or may not be given, grade placements, academic motivation, English as a second language learning, as an additional language, peer relationships, discrimination, and things like bullying. Then I'm going to talk about factors outside of school, such as pre-migration experiences and trauma, and challenges in Canada, such as home life, family transition, and financial stress. Within our own framework, we have a set of components that we really centered our research around. So for us, school integration is the adjustment of newcomer youth across all aspects of student life, including English language learning, academic performance, classroom behavior, social networking, emotional well-being, involvement in school life, understanding of the school system, and identity development. And these are the big factors in the cosmos that we have used to understand school integration. So as Anusha said, we do want to get everyone to take some time to think about their assumptions, biases, preconceptions, values, and beliefs regarding newcomer youth and their integration into high school in Canada. Just if you have a pen and paper, note down anything that comes to mind that has to do with this topic, how it relates to you, any of your values, kind of your first thoughts. And then if somebody puts anything in the chat, we'd love to hear what some of people's opinions, biases, values are before we move along and get into the real heart of the presentation. And Wendy, just let me know if anybody types any responses into the chat. Not sure if anybody's typed anything. Oh, I can see them now.
There's yeah, nobody's jumping in with their biases, preconceptions.
No worries. I just was able to. Okay, well, let's move on and then we can just keep talking about it at the end. So the main factors that we're going to talk about today really come from the experiences of the newcomer youth. They do hold the least amount of power within the education system, and those are the voices that we really want to bring light to you today. I am also going to talk about teachers' experiences and service providers, but a lot of what we talk about is coming really from the meat of the 13 newcomer youth participants that allowed me to do this research with them, and it truly was a real privilege to hear their stories. So we're going to talk about the stress of cultural transitioning, language acquisition, making connections, navigating academics, personal life, and mental health concerns. So when we talk about the stress of a cultural transition, the three main things that came up across all of the participant groups and all of the people that we talked to is this notion that everything is different, newcomer youth really experiencing mixed emotions, and a sense of loneliness and isolation. All of the newcomer participants talked to us about the fact that they are facing new, different, and unexpected norms and styles of life as they move to Canada. So it can be simple things such as the weather. A few participants told me how difficult it was for them simply to get on the bus on -30 days because they were so afraid of getting sick. And the weather here plays such a huge part of some of the difficulties they have, especially getting themselves to school. They're also facing a ton of cultural differences and a lot of differences in terms of the values and beliefs that they hold and the values and beliefs of Canadian students, or more westernized values. And this can lead to a lot of concerns for newcomer youth, especially as they integrate into our school. For example, one of the students told me, I wasn't really happy because I didn't like change. I didn't know what was right or what was wrong because like everything is just different. Everything, the culture and everything, that was just hard. So again, it's not just what's happening in the school. It's that everything about life in Canada is new for these youth. And they're bringing that into the school with them. A lot of the newcomer youth also talked about the fact that they really experience mixed emotions. And I think this is something really important to consider. The fact that the students were describing experiences across a huge range. So nervousness, excitement, sadness, feeling overwhelmed, feeling afraid, feeling really, really grateful. And they're feeling these things all at one time. So for example, one of the participants said to me, I'm so excited because I'm going to see the Canadians and other cultures here, and I'm afraid in bullying. I'm so freaking out because I don't know how to do stuff, because I'm new here, and I'm homesick because I miss the Philippines. I love the culture there so much. So again, it's not one simple emotion. They're feeling so many things at one time that are wrapped up into going into a new school, but also just coming to Canada in general. And then unfortunately, all of the participants, newcomer youth, teachers, and service providers, talked about the fact that unfortunately, the majority of newcomer youth really have a sense of loneliness and isolation as they integrate into our schools. And even when I use the word integration, it's kind of a tough word because to be integrated would mean that the school is openly accepting them. And unfortunately, a lot of newcomer youth feel like they are not truly being accepted into the school. There's an expectation that they will assimilate into school and that they will just meet the standards of the school system. Because of this, the newcomer participants really talked about the fact that there's simply not enough support during the initial transition. And there's also a huge amount of frustration due to a lack of language support. Now, one of the main things that came up across all the participant groups is that when we provide information to newcomer youth, we're generally providing instructions in English. And the student said, hey, like that is not helpful to me. If it is not in my home language, I still don't know what the expectations are here. So there's a huge amount of frustration on their part. Again, that they're just going to enter school and it's up to them and it's the students who are expected to just kind of figure it out and figure out their way. Unfortunately, students also told us that they're usually and generally too shy or unsure how to ask for help, especially from teachers or guidance counselors. So a lot of the time they rely on peers. But again, this depends on language. So there can be some really huge roadblocks for them as they integrate into school. And again, the participants really talked to us about the fact that the teachers are generally not aware of their status or struggles. So a lot of teachers will not know who is a newcomer in their class, who is an EAL student, so an English as an additional language student, and who might need extra supports. So this is a real downfall. As some of the participants said, when I arrived, I started to hate the country because sometimes like people don't accept the kind of people that don't know the language at they're not Canadian. And one student said, I felt disappointed because I thought they would help me, but miss, no one will be helping me. So again, the students feel this real sense of almost disappointment that they were not included into the school system and it was up to them to figure out their way. So I'm going to pose a question out to everyone. Again, you can respond in the text, in the chat, or just think about it to yourself and ponder it. But what do you think is the best way for newcomer youth to learn English?
Nobody's answering so far. Oh,
Reading,
somebody said
reading.
reading.
Yeah.
Reading.
Yeah, that's a great way.
I can share something that watching TV in English.
Watching TV in English. Yeah. There is, so I'll get into it, but what really came out of this research that we did is that language really is one of the biggest barriers newcomer youth are facing, but there are supports that can help them along their way. So one of the biggest struggles that we're finding within school, especially in Calgary, is that although we have policy in place stating we should encourage home language use, there is a strong implicit bias towards English only strategies. Now, we know from the research that English only strategies are massively detrimental to newcomer youth in terms of their learning, English acquisition, as well as their identity development. And that's something that we really are trying to challenge the school board and challenge teachers on. So again, newcomer youth are really sharing with us that when teachers give instructions in English, when they are not paired with a youth who speaks the same language as them, or they're not given the chance to use translation services, they feel very isolated within the school system. And it really creates a lot of feelings of stress for them. This is because they struggle to understand or communicate with peers or teachers. They're unsure how to ask for help. And they're being given the message that if you don't speak English, you're lesser than. You have less importance and less value, and also less power than all of the other students within the school, as well as all the other teachers. So there's this big fear of being made fun of. And unfortunately, a lot of students who have had the experience of being made fun of or discriminated against because of their accents or saying the wrong word. So there really is not a sense of safety in terms of English and language in our school systems. And again, there's this really big implicit bias of English only strategies. So teachers will state, it's English only in my classroom. They'll say it's because they're hoping to help the student to learn English, to help them integrate more successfully, but we're really finding that is not the case. And again, when we give these messages to students, they can really internalize this deficit narrative. They can take it upon themselves to feel really quite awful. So for example, one of the students said, learning is so hard. Like all of my classmates talked to me. I didn't understand. I didn't do anything. I didn't speak any English. Like I only say yes, like only yes. And another participant really showed that that internalized negative message of himself. And he stated, you just feel that angry, right? Then you'll be like, why am I not getting that? I'm stupid now. I should just give up and live like where I came from. So there can be a lot of negative messages around English and what we would deem as appropriate English. Which leads me to EAL or ESL classes, also known as ELL. There's a bunch of different terms that we use. EAL is the most relevant right now. It's English as an additional language compared to English language learning. So this is when there is specific instruction for newcomer youth to help them acquire the English language. In high school, it's generally a pull-out method, so they're in a specific EAL class. Junior high and elementary, that's not always the case. But we're going to focus on high school experiences right now. So the experiences are really split down the middle. For half of it, half of the students said that it really helped with grammar and writing. The EAL class helped with speaking, and it was really a positive environment to make friends because they didn't feel different. They felt like they could find peers that shared a similar experience to them. So for example, this participant said, I didn't feel any different because like me, there are always people who are having difficulties with the language and I felt like I belonged. So it was a real sense of belonging. However, there's another experience for a lot of newcomer youth that is quite negative about the EAL experience. So one of the main things is there really is not enough support prior to high school. And if they are not meeting the standardized requirements for English language testing, they'll be placed in EAL classes in high school. But this means that they're going to be held back from academic classes. And this can be a huge stress for students coming in grade 10, 11, or 12 because that means they're potentially going to have to take an extra year before they can integrate into English classes and social studies classes, and that can be very detrimental to their mental health. So, for example, one of the students said, I'm planning on challenging the ESL next year, and I'm going to ELA, because if I'm taking ESL 4 and so on, then I'm reaching grade 13, which I cannot afford going into. So again, ESL classes or EAL classes are really important. They can be very beneficial. But sometimes schools will also put way too much responsibility on the EAL teachers to take the main responsibility for teaching English, and the rest of the school kind of takes a hands-off approach, saying that's not our problem. Within our classes, it's English only. And again, that leads to really systemic injustice for newcomer youth within the school system. But there are supports. So one of the main things is really allowing home languages, allowing the student to use all of their language repertoires to learn English. Being paired with a peer or a buddy. I think I saw somewhere in a chat, I think somebody said something about a buddy system. Can be one of the most critical factors in helping their integration, because there's someone who can just explain things to them, take the confusion away, and create a lot of safety. The students and teachers and service providers all noted that speaking with teachers and peers can also be a great help to them. And then, like Anusha said, things such as watching television and reading. Now, for teachers, there's a lot of things that they can do as well. Putting their notes online, always having notes available instead of just speaking to the classroom, allowing students to use translation services, providing pictures, allowing extra time for exams. But again, this would be meaning there's more individualized services if we are not going to change, some of the more systemic issues that we have in school, which we'll get to. So as one of the students said, I feel like I learned more English by talking to friends and reading books and by myself or watching movies. So there's a lot of different things that students and newcomer youth can do as well to kind of help with that language acquisition. So as I talked about before, making connections is huge. Adolescents and being a student in high school, they just want to connect. They want to connect with peers and teachers, and that is a critical part of integration experiences. Some newcomer youth have really positive experiences with peers, and others have quite negative experiences with peers. One of the main things that came out across all of the participants is that peer connection is really impacted by language. So again, like I said, pairing students so that they're able to be in a school with someone who speaks the same language as them can be a massive step, a massive improvement to their school integration experience. Now, if they're the only person that speaks a certain language or from a certain cultural group, it can be extremely isolating, and it can be really hard for them to make connections with peers. The students also talked to us about the fact that they really want to be approached and they want to be invited. Expecting them to go up to people and be the ones to reach out is a really big, gross expectation that we have, that isn't really how the newcomer youth are going to feel comfortable. They want to be approached. They want to be invited. And there's a really shared, and I think this is why a lot of the students talk about their positive experience in the EL class, is that shared experience of being a newcomer, understanding each other's experiences, the hardships, the challenges, but as well as all the beautiful things about being a newcomer as well, and they can share those with other peers. But they also talk to us about the challenges with cultural differences, and that a lot of Canadian-born peers simply do not understand what it was like for them or what it is like for them to be a newcomer within school. And that's one of the biggest things they talked about, is that although they'd like to make friends with Canadian-born peers, a lot of the time there's just a cultural difference that they can't seem to repair, especially at the beginning of their integration experiences. However, if they start to diversify, their peer relationships, and the participants told us when they start getting more language acquisition in English. So as they're feeling more comfortable and more confident speaking English, this is when students might be more willing to go out, broach out, and be a little bit more confident to reach out to their peers. But as one of the participants said, to be honest, my friends right now are mostly Filipinos, just like me. So maybe that's part of it. We both know we're both used to the culture we have in our country, and we both know the differences in the feelings of how to be a newcomer here. So that's something to consider when we tell newcomer youth just to go make friends, go, go be social. It can be a real barrier and a real challenge for them to do that. The next big thing is making connections with teachers and counselors. The number one thing all of the newcomer youth told us is that they want to be approached. They want teachers to be the ones to make the first move, reach their hands out and be the ones to say, hi, I'm here. Tell me your story. Tell me more about yourself. Because unfortunately, teachers generally do not know the background of their students. The newcomer youth also noted that they generally feel the most connected to teachers who are also newcomers or members of a minority group themselves. So representation is critical for their experience of feeling connected to teachers. And they just noted that they feel like teachers who are newcomers themselves just understand their experience. They don't have to explain it to them. They just know what it's like, so they can be there to meet their needs. They're also asking for more frequent check-ins, not a one-time, hi, how are you, but really checking in and being the ones to say, how are things going? How are you doing? To build that trusting relationship. So for example, one of the participants told us she's a refugee too. So she knows what you mean. You feel like home again. She makes you feel like you're not the only one. It's even mentally, it just feels good. So again, representation is so important. Unfortunately, the participants and generally most of the teachers and guidance counselors, as well as the service providers, noted that teachers make a lot of inappropriate assumptions about language, students' background, for the positive and the negative. Newcomer youth really feel like teachers and guidance counselors simply do not understand their experience. And because of that, students feel like they cannot turn to them for support. So for example, one of the participants said, this one teacher I had was like, I didn't think you were going to pass. Like he didn't believe in me. And like, aren't teachers supposed to believe in you? So when teachers have those really ingrained biases and negative assumptions, that comes across to students. And when they feel that, they are not going to seek you out for help. So even though students might be achieving well academically, they can be still suffering in silence, and they're not going to be the ones to turn to us to say, hey, I need more support. Now, all of the newcomer youth talked to us about the really critical importance of extracurricular involvement. So joining clubs, groups, and school events to help bridge some of those connections and make them feel integrated. The students or the participants who did join extracurricular talked about the positive experience of connecting with peers and really wanting to join to participate. But the school we were in had a ton of extracurricular groups and clubs, but the students weren't participating. And the teachers talked about the fact that even though they have all these clubs, they couldn't understand why it was such a challenge to get newcomer youth to engage. And something that came out of this research is that students, even though they want to join, a lot of the time they're not told about the club. And they're not just going to go seek it out themselves. They really wanted to be invited. They want somebody to bring them to their club. The other thing is that a lot of the time there can be a lack of culturally appropriate spaces, or there's clubs that simply aren't culturally appropriate or important to the newcomer youth. And with a lack of time, when they're so stressed with schoolwork and having a job and taking care of other responsibilities, joining extracurricular involvement simply is not the top of their priority. So one of the students said to us, if someone asked me to go volunteer, I would need to go. But life in Canada is so different from Vietnam. I mean, like I volunteer by my own. I have to find information by myself and not by invite. And I think that's something we really have to consider when we're trying to get newcomer youth to participate in extracurricular events. So moving along to navigating academics, what are just some people's assumptions and biases about academic learning within high school in Canada?
Nothing so far. Um, while we're waiting to see if folks chat, I can share a little bit of an experience that I encountered when I worked with a group of 5 women to support a refugee family in the country in 2015. We had a bit of a conflict among our group because our our family wanted to have a TV channel from their own language, from their own background, and some of the women in the group didn't think that was a good idea because that would prevent them from learning English, as you talked about before, right? This English only mentality. And it took a lot of convincing on my part to help them understand that maybe that was a connection to their culture. And that maybe if we were displaced, we would still want to know what was happening back home.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think some of the biases and assumptions that I've heard from other participants and other groups and other workshops that I've done is that, you know, individuals come to Canada and academics is the number one thing. School here is either too easy or, you know, there's not the same structure, same demands, concerns about their child getting into post-secondary education. Um, and those are some of the things and the biases that have, uh, they have the knowledge and skills, curriculum, but not the language to express their knowledge. Yeah,
love that.
yeah, absolutely. So when I talked to the participants, the three main things that came out were navigating all around system differences, adjusting to the new curriculum, and then something really interesting that came out was this advocacy piece. So when we talk about all around system differences, we're talking about the differences in how school in Canada is structured. So for a lot of newcomer youth, there is this renegotiating of pre-existing expectations. So what does school look like? Are they inside or outside? Some of the students said, I don't understand why school in Canada is always inside. Where I came from, we spent most of our time outside. At least there was, you know, windows, doors were open. In Canada, we're in the basement. So simple things, just like the structure of school can be completely different. Values of education can be very different and we have to consider. One of the service providers reminded me that for some of the newcomer youth he works with, for females, any like education is not the priority in their home country. So coming here and asking them to engage up to grade 12 is a real challenge. And for some boys after grade 6, they would not be obtaining an education. So when we are really pushing academics, for some students, that is not a priority to them. Compared to other students, you know, they want to be in the top academic stream, so AP or IB, getting 99% honor roll and in all of the hardest classes because that's kind of their expectation, their values. There's a high value of education, but that's not the case for everybody, and we have to consider that. Again, the grading structure is completely different. You know, what grade do you need to pass compared to pass fail? There's a lot of confusion around credit-based systems and having to achieve 100 credits. And there's a lot of really inappropriate assessments early on. So students are being placed too high or too low based on the language assessments that they're getting at reception centers or by guidance counselors. And what guidance counselors are telling us is that they simply do not have the time to go through all of this information and make sure students are placed in the right class, especially if they don't have oh, my complete brain went blank, if they don't have report cards. So there can be a lot of guessing and simply placing students based on age, not actual ability. There also can be a lot of concerns if a student isn't diagnosed with any type of learning disability or other things that could place them at a disadvantage. So for example, one of the students said, in Ethiopia, how the system work is it's not like, you know, in Canada, you pass, you fail, you just stay in one class, right? That's how it works. It was a little bit challenging because where we come from, it's a completely different thing, right? So even having different teachers, having to change class to class, opening a locker. These are all little stresses and little things that newcomer youth are learning as they come into Canada and what the expectations are. And then there's a lot of concerns around the curriculum. So this is students' experiences with English language arts, social studies, mathematics, science, and option classes. Something I really want to point out is that our education system is founded on Eurocentric, monolinguistic, white, middle-class values. That's also how our testing structures are. So we're testing based on, again, Eurocentric, monolinguistic, white, middle-class norms that favor that population. So inherently, there's a massive systemic injustice within our school system that newcomer youth are facing. So they could be held back due to language and, like somebody said in the chat, not ability. If the school is concerned that they will not pass the grade 12 diploma with an academic grade that will increase the school's ranking, they may be streamed into lower level classes. Again, that's a huge systemic injustice for these students. And a lot of the newcomer participants noted that their culture and their language are simply not represented, and this makes them feel like their cultural knowledge is not valued within the education system in Canada. And that's just so upsetting and so concerning, because they have so much ability, yet they're facing systemic injustices, which are causing them to really internalize this deficit narrative. And at the same time, they're managing a lot of tensions. Parents will have expectations, the school will have expectations, and then they're going to have their own expectations. And there can be a lot of push-pull for newcomer youth. So for one of the students said, I don't understand anything about it, and I still choose, and I want a high expectation. I study a lot. I'm stressed now because I'm going to finish my school late. I feel like I'm underestimated. And another student was talking about social studies, and she said, there's subjects that I don't know, like social. What social? I don't know the history of Canada, but if you ask me the history of the Philippines, I can answer. And my friends say that I don't need your history, I need mine. And I think we really need to consider this when we're talking about the academic experiences of newcomer youth. Something else that really came up in the teachers and the service providers is there's a need for advocacy for individual and systemic change. But there's a ton of misinformation, especially that may be given to parents, about what classes does a student need to get into university or post-secondary education, what grades are necessary to get the 100 credits. And it's the expectation, unfortunately, it's up to the student generally to advocate for themselves. And what we'd really like to see is a lot more work happening with parents to help them understand the school system. Help them help their child navigate when they feel like there is an injustice that's occurring. But again, unfortunately, it's up to the student. But when they don't speak the language, or they don't speak English, or there's concerns about how to communicate, and a lot of students don't have those advocacy skills. You know, fighting for themselves isn't something that would be culturally appropriate. But unfortunately, that's kind of the expectation with school. And there's this real need to clarify and help students transition to post-secondary education really early on in their high school experience to help them as they transition out of high school. So one of the teachers said, this is where they come to get it. This is where they feel safe. This is their place. So more of our students, I think, a high proportion, percentage-wise, need somebody in their corner, and they need an adult that's rooting for them. So they need that safe person to help them advocate. So again, I'm just going to pose this question. Think about it. Me and Anusha can talk about it as well. Just what are some of the factors outside of school that you believe may be impacting youth integration experiences? And for the sake of time, we can just move on, just think about it for yourselves. And then if there's any questions at the end, we can get to there. We can talk then. But from the work we did, the three main things that really came about has newcomer youth, family. Yeah, absolutely. Family stress. And not even necessarily family stress, but what are the supports at home? What does that look like for them? That's a huge factor, and as you see, a critical one that came up as we talked to newcomer youth teachers and service providers, as well as this notion of personal identity and some mental health concerns. So when we talk about family factors, we're talking about, those systemic factors outside of school impacting immigration experiences and school integration. One of the big things that came up as I talked with settlement workers was the reunification with family. Some of the participants noted that after 8 years of separation from mom or dad, they were so excited to be with them again, and it was such a positive experience. However, for some participants, it was quite a negative experience. They left grandparents, uncles, aunts, or other parents and siblings behind to come to Canada, and there's a real feeling like they've lost a huge sense of their support network. So again, those are our own biases. It's not always positive and it's not always negative. We need to talk to the youth about what that's like for them. Some students have huge academic support at home. Parents are going to be working on English, working on math, working on social studies with them. Where other students, they might be living with people who are, a neighbor that they knew that they're moving in with, and mom and dad are still back in the home country. So they might be moving in with complete strangers and getting absolutely zero academic support at home. There might be a ton of financial stress. A lot of newcomer students are working, extra jobs. Parents are working multiple jobs. So then they're taking on the role of caregiver, taking care of siblings. And parents are going through their own adjustment. They have their own stress and their own things that they're trying to navigate as they integrate into the country. Generally, we hear that there's very high academic expectations, and newcomer youth are feeling extremely stressed by the amount of pressure on their shoulders to achieve very high academics. Also, there can be a real clash in values. Newcomer youth wanting to explore, more of the Western Canadian values with some of their peers, and parents at home saying, no, we're really gonna focus on our own culture and really want you to focus on school. So sometimes there can be a lot of mismatch with parents and youth and a lot of struggles for them. And unfortunately, there's this pre-notion or this bias from teachers that parents are generally hard to reach. Parents might not speak English, and it's up to the newcomer youth student to translate. But again, that's a bias on the teacher's part, because from the work that we've done, a lot of parents want the school to reach out to them, but they actually feel like the school is hard to reach. So again, there's a lot of biases and a lot of mix matching. So as one of the students said, my dad has been working here for 8 years, and then we lived in the Philippines for so long, and then I'm not that sure, that comfortable with my father because I don't know his attitude. I don't want to talk much about him. So again, we can't make assumptions about what a newcomer youth is experiencing at home, and we need to be the ones to talk to them about it. There's also a big change in their personal identity. And this is something that really came out of this research, is how do we help newcomer youth develop a multicultural identity? Some of the other things that the newcomer participants really talked about is there's a real shift in their role as a student. Some participants were university students before they came into Canada. Now they're high school students again. And that really was difficult for them to, negotiate. What does it mean to be a student? Or they were getting really high grades before. Now they're struggling to pass classes. So again, a lot of that internalized, who am I? What am I as a student? Really asking them about their personal values. What's important to them? What are their future goals? A lot of newcomer youth, if there is not the appropriate services and systemic systems in place, can struggle to get a multicultural identity. And when we talk about multicultural identity, it's feeling like they can retain their culture and also integrate aspects of Canadian culture. So as one of the participants said, your culture is part of you. It's something you never leave behind just because you're in Canada, and your culture and language and who you are. It'll also help you a lot, I guess. It did help me. So how do we help them build a multicultural identity and not feel like they just have to assimilate or take all of the Canadian values, but bring forward their knowledge and who they are as an individual? everything we have talked about, isolation, not feeling represented, um, all of the systemic barriers lead to mental health concerns. So these are the social emotional factors impacting school integration. So things such as pre and post migration trauma are things that we should be talking about and have knowledge about to help them navigate. Again, a lack of representation can be really detrimental. Having really high academic expectations. The newcomer youth, the teachers, and the service providers all talked about the anxiety and depression that they're seeing in newcomer youth, mainly as they feel that their identity is not represented within the school system. And then lots of intersecting concerns. So are they from, within their school, even though they're a newcomer, are they the only person from a certain country? Are they the only person who speaks a certain language? Are they a member of the LGBTQ community as well as a newcomer? So there's a lot of extra layers that go into identity that can be causing more intersecting mental health concerns for them. One of the service providers said it so well. It's when it comes to understanding the school system, yes, that's a need, but it's nothing compared to their emotional adjustment. Again, the cultural part can be traumatizing, but when you say adjustment, it's a road. It manifests, you could see behaviors like cutting, skipping class, depression, drug use. You may see it as an adjustment. And he really talked about the fact that we need to have more social emotional supports and culturally sensitive supports for newcomer youth to help them navigate the mental health concerns that we're seeing. Which is going to quickly lead into some of the needs that we believe would help the integration experiences of newcomer youth. We really feel there's a need for enhanced language and academic support, predominantly helping teachers, school counselors, and administrative staff understand their experience and understand the systemic injustice that they're facing within the school system. We also think there needs to be more appropriate language and academic assessments that include parents and are within the home language, so that everybody is on the same page. Insiders can help the school appropriately place students, and students aren't in a position of having to advocate for themselves, but the school and the professionals are advocating for them. There's also a need for more whole school supports. So settlement agencies, community organizations, and schools working holistically, working together and communicating together, as well as the EAL department, guidance counselors, administrative staff, all working together so it's more of a wraparound system and not such a disjointed experience for the newcomer youth. Again, there needs to be more holistic language supports. We have to support newcomer youth's language across the curriculum. It cannot only be the expectation of the EAL classroom and the EAL teachers. We also believe that teachers need to learn more culturally sustaining and social justice pedagogies to really challenge that deficit narrative that place newcomer youth at a really high risk of disengagement. There also needs to be more individualized programs for when our style of education simply isn't appropriate for the student. And how can we make that happen? So one of the participants said, I suggest they make something better about how not only what they do in the system in their school, but understanding what the feelings of the student must be to have a better English for them. There's also a need for enhanced teacher and counselor support. Teachers need to initiate contact. There needs to be multicultural and social justice and language training for all teachers. Again, they need to challenge their assumptions and their biases and how that might be impacting their work with newcomer youth and newcomer parents and families. Schools have to be the ones to reach out and connect with parents and make them integral into the school experience, and make them feel safe to share their concerns and their knowledge. Teachers have to be the ones to reach out for ongoing support, and we really have to diversify the population of teachers and guidance counselors within schools to represent the changing populace of Canada. So as a student said, they make the first move and don't wait for us to ask them for help. They just give us a tour and give the supplies, support the ones come here so they can feel at ease and at home. And then again, we need more mental health initiatives. There needs to be more access to multicultural resources. We need way more cultural insiders working in schools to challenge the Western values and biases that we have. We need to talk about the stigma of mental health concerns. and have these conversations with newcomer youth so that they can advocate. They can be the ones to advocate for and address systemic injustice within their schools. So one of the service providers said, you can't just say it, it should be in the system. It should be in their training, because if you just say it through the meetings, then that's it. It should be printed. It's important. It should be in black and white. It's incorporated into their language, and it's incorporated into their agenda. So again, not something we just say, but actively something that we're doing in schools to improve the experiences of newcomer youth. The complexity of this topic is that there's not one single thing. You know, it's a cosm of factors like language support, academic performance, social networking, classroom behavior, emotional and family well-being, involvement in school, understanding of the school system, and how we can help them with identity development. And now I'm going to pass it off to Anusha, and I think there was a comment in the chat.
Yes, to the cultural insiders, I would like to see that in the schools. Yeah.
In terms of teachers, guidance, like administrative staff, I think something that we saw is a lot of the time cultural insiders will be brought in as like an extra ad hoc, but we want them to be critically integrated into the school system, and I believe that's the only way we make systemic change.
Agreed. I'm aware of the time, although we seem to have a quiet group tonight, so I'm not sure how many questions we'll have, but I'll just quickly go through some of the implications of our work, Elisa, which really stem from the voices and the experiences of the newcomer youth who participated in the study. So I'll just kind of quickly go through it because it highlights some of the needs that you talked about before. We're going to talk about implications for practice, implications for research, and implications for policy and curriculum. So just one quick note in terms of educators and administrators, I think it's important to consider the curriculum, as you highlighted. That's key. The cultural sensitivity and awareness of all school staff, from teachers to administrative personnel to guidance counselors. And, you know, it is recommended that we work towards hiring more diverse school personnel. This is, you know, something that the participants talked about in our research, but it's also something that's come to light given the current socio-political context that we're living in, where issues of racism and discrimination have been highlighted. In terms of counselors and psychologists, I think it's critical to find new ways of working with newcomer clients. We know that the models that we've been trained with are Western, Eurocentric, colonial, as you pointed out, same as the education system, but they are not constructed with diversity in mind. So they're not constructed for newcomer clients. We need to consider the role of intersectionality, the role of identity negotiation, and I think what's critical is that newcomer students have told us time and time again that they want teachers and counselors to approach them. They feel quite intimidated to be the ones to approach staff, and so they need folks to reach out to them. And they need folks, you know, on the floor in the school, reaching out to them, often multiple times. In terms of community programming and supports, the only piece I'll highlight is access. We can have a lot of programs in the school, in the community, but if students don't feel like they're accessible, they won't use them. We know that some do, but often a lot of marketing and advertisement, has to be done for folks to participate. We know that there are a ton of people who can benefit from these supports, yet they don't always access them. So we need to think about how we can make them more friendly, more accessible, and more in line with the values of the newcomer students themselves. In terms of implications for training, sorry if you hear a little voices. Those are my little children. I've told them to be quiet for an hour and a half, but I think they've after an hour they're tapped out. So in terms of training, I think it's important for counselors to consider issues around grade placement, career planning strategies, and the fact that there's a ton of diversity among newcomer communities. We talk about um, newcomers as a group. And, I do appreciate the fact that our research is inclusive of multiple cultures and communities, but at the same time, it's important to take an intersectional lens to make sure that we're tailoring our interventions to the needs of different students. And lastly, almost lastly, in terms of research, it's important for it to be flexible, to prioritize the welfare of the participants as opposed to the needs of the researchers, and it needs to include reflexivity at the core. Lastly, in terms of policy and curriculum, it's critical to address the social determinants of mental health. You mentioned mental health, Elisa. This is something that is very vague in the literature because there is no evidence that newcomer communities suffer from more mental health challenges that sorry about that. There is no documentation that states that newcomer folks suffer from more mental health challenges than non-newcomer folks. But that statistics to me is not very important. What's important is to know that folks are coming to us in our research telling us that they're lonely, they're anxious, they're depressed, they're feeling traumatized, whether that's clinical or not, whether that meets diagnostic criteria or not. What's most important is that they're living these difficult experiences and they often don't have many spaces to share those experiences. So it's important to foster, again, access to mental health services and to think about what mental health services look like. Because if they look like all we know in the Western world, they're not going to be appealing to clients. It's important for us as professionals to collaborate together as much as possible. And I'll just plug an event at the end of our talk today, which could increase that collaboration. And it's important to consider the concepts of empowerment and community development. Thank you very much. We're happy to take any questions you might have.
Box is open for questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And while folks are pondering their questions, I just want to share appreciation with you, Elisa, for sharing your work with everyone. And I know you spent many years working really hard in a context where you were an outsider and you embraced that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to address the chat question. What about having resources translated into a student's mother tongue? Absolutely. We think that is such a critical thing. From the moment of school integration all the way through, there should be ample resources to translate all of that information. And for example, the St. John Reception Center, teachers, guidance counselors, they have access to translators. So even if a student comes in and they're asking for support, a lot of people feel like there's not enough time. It is possible to set that up for students. And then again, translating all resources should be such a great suggestion.
All right, if there aren't any more questions, or if you do have a question later, please send it to ces@ahs.ca and I will forward that along. We'd like to thank Anusha and Alyssa. CS is very fortunate to always have great speakers, give so freely of their time and expertise, and this evening was no exception. I also wanted to thank all of our attendees, parents, teachers, everyone who after a busy day and during back to school have made the time to learn how to better help youth in their care. So we encourage you to register for future CES sessions and share our newsletter. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Wendy. If it's okay with you, I would just like to share quickly that I put a link in the chat, which is an event that we're holding at the end of September, on September 24th. It's a free event, and it's an educational summit online for one day on the school integration needs of newcomer families. And we have speakers in French and in English from across North America who are going to share their expertise on the topic. So please
Fantastic.
feel
Is this a free event?
it's a free event.
I can
And
pop
yeah,
that into our
you can
newsletter.
register. Oh yeah, that would be lovely.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
you can register yourself or share in your networks. And yeah, thank you
Definitely. I'll put
giving
that
me
in our newsletter. When did you say it was?
September 24th.
Okay, yeah, I'll put that in our next newsletter, and I'll also send it out in the link to everybody with the recording once we've reviewed it, and the handout in the coming days. Again, thank you, Anusha, and thank you, Alyssa. And sorry, Alyssa, I didn't refer to you as doctor earlier.
That's
Sorry,
I
I just,
my brain hasn't comprehended that that is a title I can even use yet. So that is fine. Thank you so much.
all right. Take care,
Bye.
everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.